Sondra Locke spent her life fighting for control over her career, over her body, over her own story. She married a man she never shared a bed with. She gave up 2 pregnancies for a partner who later fathered 2 children with someone else. She took on one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, and did it while battling breast cancer. Then she died quietly at 74, and the world waited 6 weeks to find out what really happened behind the gates of that Bel Air mansion. And what did she know about Clint Eastwood that nobody else did? Sondra Locke entered the world under circumstances that stay with a person long before they can understand them. She was born Sandra Louise Smith on May 28, 1944, in Shelbyville, Tennessee. When Sandra was still very young, life shifted again. In 1948, when she was 4 years old, her mother married Alfred Locke, a construction business owner. The family lived close to poverty, but even in those narrow circumstances, Sandra stood out. She was bright, disciplined, and impossible to miss. At Shelbyville Central High, where she studied from 1958 to 1962, she became a cheerleader, played girls' basketball, edited the Royal Yearbook, and finished junior high as valedictorian with a 97.72% average. Her classmates gave her a nickname, calling her the Duchess of Studiousness. She became president of the French Club and built the image of the perfect small-town high achiever. Still, that did not mean life felt easy. Boys may have noticed her, but many did not see her as dating material. In her graduation yearbook, when asked about her ambition, she wrote that she wanted always to take disappointments with a smile. That line feels small at first, but it says a lot. She was already learning how to turn hurt into composure. Then came college, and with it the first major break in her life. She enrolled at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro on a full scholarship and studied theater. For a while, it looked like the beginning of something clear and hopeful. She performed in productions of Life with Father and The Crucible, and joined the Alpha Psi Omega Honor Society. But, after just 2 semesters, everything collapsed. Around 1963, at age 19, she dropped out following a massive family rift that would never truly heal. Her brother Donald later exploded with anger and blamed her close adolescent friend Gordon Anderson, claiming Gordon had put some kind of hypnotic spell on her and pulled her away from the family. Whether that was jealousy, confusion, or something deeper, the result was brutal. Sondra cut ties almost completely. She never knew her biological father, Raymond. She later skipped her mother's funeral and Alfred Locke's funeral. She ignored Donald, his wife, and their 3 daughters. In her 1997 memoir, she wrote that there was no sense pretending relationships that did not exist. It was a cold sentence, but it reflected the way she lived. Once she shut a door, she shut it hard. That break left room for rumor, and Nashville would become a city full of them. But before the rumors, there was work. She had to survive, and she did whatever she could. After leaving college, she worked as a bookkeeper for Tyson Foods, took a job as a real estate receptionist, and lived alone while commuting. She was young, largely on her own, and already building a life separate from her family. By 1964, she had made her way into local media at WSM Radio in Nashville. Soon she moved up to WSM-TV as a promotions assistant in 1965. At the same time, she modeled for the Tennessean and voiced ads. The jobs were practical, but they were also training. She was learning how to be seen, how to speak to an audience, and how to move inside a world built on image. At Circle Players Inc. repping in Nashville during the mid-1960s, she sharpened that ability even more. Theater gave her a place to grow, but it also pulled her into a social circle that fed more gossip than calm. By 1966, that drive was easy to spot. A United Press International photo captured the 22-year-old playing in the snow in Nashville, full of motion and brightness. But behind the image was a far more deliberate effort. Gordon Anderson, who had by then become one of the most important people in her life, helped reshape her look for Hollywood. He bound her chest, bleached her eyebrows, and gave her a more gamine style. She also changed her first name from Sandra to Sondra because she did not want to be called Sandy. Even her age became flexible when opportunity demanded it. That mattered in July 1967 when she auditioned for The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. She was 23, but she shaved 6 years off and presented herself as 17. The reinvention was strategic and bold. She was competing against 590 Southern actresses, and she had no reel to lean on. What she did have was nerve, preparation, and the right push at the right moment. She got the role of Mick Kelly. The lie about her age worked so well that she would keep the truth blurry for much of her public life. That same year, on September 25, 1967, she married Gordon Lee Anderson in Nashville. On paper, it looked like a normal step into adult life. In reality, it was anything but ordinary. Later, court documents would describe the marriage as being more like sister and brother, and a 1989 affidavit said it was never consummated. Gordon was gay, and Sondra herself later described him as being more like a sister to her. Yet the marriage lasted legally for 51 years until her death in 2018. It was one of the strangest and most revealing arrangements in Hollywood history. It offered loyalty, cover, companionship, and stability, but not romance in the usual sense. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter turned Sondra Locke into one of the most talked-about newcomers in Hollywood. When the film arrived in 1968, so did the awards attention. Locke earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress and received 2 Golden Globe nominations, one for Best Supporting Actress and one for Most Promising Newcomer. The irony was sharp. Hollywood was presenting her as this fresh young discovery, while quietly helping hide the fact that she was older than the image being sold. Her breakthrough rested on 2 versions of herself at once. The real woman, already in her mid-20s, and the younger public version the studio believed audiences would accept more easily. Success gave her visibility, but she was not willing to stay frozen in the plain, innocent shape of her first role. In January 1969, she posed for a semi-nude Playboy pictorial. The move was not random. She wanted to shake off the schoolgirl image that had attached itself to her and replace it with something more sensual, more adult, and more commercially powerful. It worked. The photos changed how she was seen. Even with all that attention, her early career stayed uneven. The true breakout after her debut came with Willard in 1971. In 1972, she moved into stranger territory with A Reflection of Fear. The part pushed her into playing a deeply unsettling teenage role, even though she was nearly twice the age of the character. That gap between truth and presentation followed her everywhere by then. Then came the partnership that would define and ultimately destroy her career. In 1976, she co-starred with Clint Eastwood in The Outlaw Josie Wales. The film formed the basis of a long-time working and personal relationship. They would go on to co-star in 5 more films together, including The Gauntlet, 1977, Every Which Way But Loose, 1978, Bronco, Billy, 1980, and Sudden Impact, 1983. But their relationship became increasingly tumultuous, complicated by the fact that, although Locke was living with Eastwood, she was still married to Gordon Anderson. As interest in the Eastwood-Locke affair has resurged in 2025 and 2026, fueled by new true crime documentaries re-examining 1990s Hollywood power dynamics, the public has once again grappled with the extent of what Locke endured behind closed doors. In the late 1970s, Locke endured betrayal from Eastwood that never really left her. In June 1978, when she was 34, she learned she was pregnant during the wrap of Every Which Way But Loose. Years earlier, Eastwood had made her remove her IUD because he said it was uncomfortable for him, so they were relying on the rhythm method. Locke later described the abortion that followed as a hard and painful decision. Then, in 1979, when she became pregnant again at 35, the situation grew even worse. At UCLA Medical Center, Eastwood pushed for tubal ligation and told her, "I think it would be best for our life together. Aren't I enough?" She went through a second abortion and the sterilization and later wrote that their bond never recovered from it. He bought her a Bel Air mansion for $1.12 million, almost like a consolation prize, but the wound stayed open. By 1985, Locke had already sensed a change in him. Later, she discovered just how much had been hidden. Flight attendant Jacelyn Reeves gave birth to his daughter Morgan Eastwood on December 12, 1986, with the father left off publicly. Then came his son Scott Eastwood on February 19, 1988. By 1988, their relationship was breaking apart in full view. even if much of the damage had been building quietly for years. On December 29, 1988, at their hideaway in Sun Valley, Idaho, the tension exploded into a screaming match. Locke confronted Eastwood over the way he had withdrawn from her. That night turned out to be their last intimate encounter. After that, Eastwood referred to her as someone sitting on my real estate in Bel Air and moved into the caretaker's quarters. Then, in March 1989, he wiretapped the home phone, listening in on her calls with lawyers as she explored her options. Finally, on April 10, 1989, while she was away directing Impulse, he changed the locks, boxed up her belongings, and shut her out completely. In September 1990, during the 19-month legal fight that began in April 1989, Locke was diagnosed with breast cancer. She believed the extreme stress of the case had played a role. She was a lifelong non-smoker, practiced meditation, and did weight training. Yet she was now facing a brutal illness on top of daily courtroom warfare. She underwent a double mastectomy and chemotherapy, and the treatment drained her. At one point, she said, "He doesn't care if I live or die," because Eastwood never even called. On November 24, 1990, the case settled privately. Eastwood funded a $1.5 million multi-year directing deal at Warner Brothers. She also received their $2.2 million West Hollywood home, $450,000 in cash, and continuing monthly payments. At the time, it looked like the end of the war. In truth, it was only another layer of it. By June 1995, Locke was back in court, this time accusing Eastwood of fraud and breach of duty. From 1990 to 1993, Warner Brothers rejected every one of her more than 30 projects, including ideas that later became successful films such as Junior and Addicted to Love. She came to believe the directing deal had never been real at all. Then she uncovered something worse. Eastwood had secretly reimbursed Warner Brothers the $1.5 million through profits connected to Unforgiven. In other words, the deal that had persuaded her to drop the first lawsuit had been quietly funded by him from the start. She believed it was a sham meant to trap her and bury her career. Jurors later said the vote was leaning 10-2 in her favor. On September 24, 1996, just as a verdict seemed close, the case settled again for an undisclosed amount. The case later became a familiar example in law school discussions about good faith contracts. As recently as early 2026, legal analysts have revisited the Locke-Eastwood fraud case on podcasts dedicated to entertainment law, noting that it fundamentally changed how palimony and development deals are structured in Hollywood. In 1997, she also fought in print. Her memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly: A Hollywood Journey, took direct aim at Eastwood. She described him as a completely evil, manipulating, lying excuse for a man. She wrote that he had controlled projects, blocked her career, and used his public image as a weapon to make her seem small in Hollywood. The timing only made it sharper. Her book came out just weeks before Eastwood. On Eastwood aired on television, and in that special, editors cut out nearly every scene in which she appeared, making it seem as if she had hardly existed in those films at all. Sondra Locke died on November 3, 2018, at her Los Angeles home, but the public did not learn about her death for nearly 6 weeks. Her death certificate listed cardiac arrest linked to breast and bone cancer, and authorities were informed right away, so the delay was never about the death being unknown. That long silence made the whole thing feel ghostly. A woman once tied to some of Clint Eastwood's biggest films disappeared almost without public notice. By the time the news finally broke in December 2018, many people were stunned that an Oscar-nominated actress had died quietly at 74, and only then become a headline. Her body was cremated on November 9, 2018, at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park and Mortuary, and the ashes were given to her husband, Gordon Anderson. That part of the story also raised eyebrows, because reports later confirmed that she left him an estate worth around $20 million. In 2025, as part of a wave of retrospective articles marking the 30th anniversary of the Unforgiven era, Locke's story was revisited with renewed outrage. Many critics pointed out that, had she lived in the post-Me Too era, her voice might have been heard much louder and much sooner. Her tragedy was not just the cancer that took her life, or the betrayals that broke her heart. It was that she fought so hard told the truth so clearly, and yet spent her final years largely forgotten by the industry she had given everything to be part of. What really ended Sondra Locke was not any single moment. It was the slow, cruel accumulation of silence, power, and a system that protected the man on the poster while leaving the woman beside him to die alone in a Bel Air mansion, waiting 6 weeks for the world to notice she was gone.